Good morning, good afternoon, or evening for those of you watching in other time zones or watching this on delay. Welcome to the MuseScore Café, today November 28th, 2018, and this is kind of a special edition. It happens to coincide with the release of the MuseScore 3 beta, which happened like an hour ago. So, oh, it looks like you're seeing me and you're not seeing, let me give you the screen. You probably want to see other stuff other than just me. There we go. This is MuseScore 3 beta, and the MuseScore 3 beta, you will hopefully notice, looks not that different from MuseScore 2 that you've been accustomed to, and that's kind of on purpose. There's a lot of things that are different, a lot of things that are new and improved, but we tried to keep as much as we could the same. So my goal today is just to kind of give you a tour of what is in MuseScore 3 beta. If you already watched the Café where I talked about the alpha, a lot of things will seem familiar. There's some changes. I may or may not hit everything, but I want to hit kind of the highlights of what's in here, and also talk not just technically about what's in it, but what's coming, what you can do, how you can help make the final release of MuseScore 3 successful. So the first thing I actually want to do is quit and restart, and I want to do this with revert to factory settings so you can see what you will see when you first start MuseScore 3. One thing I should mention is this, unlike the alpha build, which some of you may have installed, or unlike any nightly builds that anyone has ever installed, this one is an actual installer. It's an actual like MSI file for Windows, or DNZ, I think, for Mac. In other words, you can install it like any other program on your system. You don't have to do anything special to do that. And it can coexist with MuseScore 2. So when you install it, MuseScore 3 will be separate from MuseScore 2. So you can keep both programs installed. They will keep separate. They'll keep separate copies of scores and everything. And also one of the great features of this is there's now an automatic updater that will inform you when there's updates available, whether it's like another beta version or when the real version becomes available, etc. And then once the real version becomes available, if an update becomes available, for bug fixes or to add new features, you'll automatically be informed and automatically be able to update. So anyhow, that's something to know about this. The whole process is becoming easier. So let me do this revert to factory settings so you can see what it's going to look like. Meanwhile, I'm going to return to our chat. And actually, I don't want to go to the chat. I want to go, where do I want to go? I want to go somewhere here to the actual announcement so I can make sure. I think I posted a link to the announcement in the description for this video, but just to kind of be sure, I want to also put it here in the chat. And in the announcement here is the link to where you can download, because it's the Windows version, the Mac version, and where you can get versions for Linux. So that's where you can get that. And I'm going to keep referring to this announcement so that I can look over the list of features and things to make sure that I talk about anything that people care about. And as always, I do a lot of talking and I talk fast. I know I talk fast because otherwise this goes on forever. And I don't want to take up a lot of everyone's time. But if you have questions, please use the chat to ask me questions. On any topic, really, although this one is special enough, I would like to keep things as focused as possible on MuseScore 3. But if you have other questions that aren't related to MuseScore 3, go ahead and ask, and then I'll keep them in mind for future cafes. So I just did the revert to factory settings, so now I need to actually return to where MuseScore started. It restarted when I did that. So the first thing you'll see is this startup wizard. And the startup wizard allows you to kind of choose some basic settings. So the first thing you'll choose is what your language is, and it should default to whatever your system language is. So if your computer is set for French, it'll choose the French language. But if you want MuseScore in English, even though your computer's set up for French, you can choose that. It's possible you might want to do that because because this is only a beta release, it's not fully translated yet, and I don't know for sure what happens if you try to use the French version, if it defaults to using English menus for things that haven't been translated yet. I don't actually know. Someone could maybe clue me in on that. Anyhow, oh, and that's one of the wonderful things about MuseScore, I should mention. Because it is a community effort, compared to other notation programs, it has been translated into like just way more languages than you might ever expect. I mean, there are translations so that you can use the MuseScore interface in like 50 different languages, which is really incredible. All right, so next you also get to choose your keyboard layout so that it can customize a few things about shortcuts based on what your keyboard layout is. You can see there's all these other keyboard layouts that exist, but this is what I have. All right, then you choose your workspace. MuseScore 2 had two different workspaces, the basic and the advanced workspace. and basically this just means different palettes. The basic has like a limited set of palettes. The advanced has more palettes, more items on the palettes. And so I always, the basic palette is designed to not overwhelm beginners, but I always switch immediately to the advanced palette. And now you can do it right here in the Startup Wizard. Finally, you'll see there's a screen asking you about tours. If you are an expert MuseScore user, you will be totally justified in turning these tours off at some point, but I would recommend you turn them on, you leave them on. What they are is they're little tutorials that will pop up as you need them. When you first access some feature, a little box will show up explaining briefly how to use that feature. And there'll be one tour that shows up when I first start the program. And so I encourage everyone to look at those and let us know how you think those are working. Give us advice on improving them and so forth, because we really want to make the experience of using MuseScore, for beginners especially, as painless as possible. I mean, we want to make it painless for everyone, but the tours are mostly for beginners, because it's designed to show up the first time you use some given feature. So I'm going to leave these tours on so you can see them. All right, and those are all the settings that you go in the Startup Wizard. When I hit Finish, now we'll finally see MuseScore 3. So this is MuseScore 3, and as mentioned, it looks a lot like MuseScore 2. Already I see, well, what is that about? So this should be showing you something. I don't know what that's going to do. All right, that's going to do something else. All right, well, that's interesting. It looked normal a minute ago. I'm not going to worry about that too much, but this is what you should be seeing, is an ad for my course. Anyhow, that you may or may not see that. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the main window again. When I close this Start Center here, the Start Center is what shows up when you first start MuseScore normally, and it's going to show you scores you've previously opened here. And it gives you the ability to create a new score or open a score. I'm not going to mess with any of that right now. I just want to close this window. And when I do that, excuse me. Oh, I know what I need. What time is it? Oh, yes. This is like one of the highlights of the day. I don't know that I should be doing this holding it, but I'm holding it so you can see. I think you can see. Well, whether you can see or not, I'm doing it. That's too hard. There we go. Yes, indeed. That is why I call this the Café, because for me it is... Actually, I've already had some coffee, but now I get to have more. Okay, so when you start MuseScore, you get to see these tours that kind of show you some of the things. And so I want to just walk you through this startup tour here so you can see what this is about. One of the things you'll see is there's an option to control. At any time, you can just uncheck that, and then you'll never see the tours again. And there's a way to turn them back on, and I'll show you that too. So it's just going to go through a few screens showing you this is the score view where you're going to enter your school score, and I tell you a few things that might be useful and not obvious, like you can use your mouse wheel or the touchpad to scroll. If you have multiple scores open, you can switch using the tabs at the top of the score view. All right, so those are some things that maybe not everyone figures out right away, so I mention them in the tour. Next, it highlights the toolbars and tells you that that this is where there's some commands, and then it starts talking about the individual toolbars, the file toolbar, what kinds of things it does, the playback toolbar and what it does, and then the note input toolbar. Now that this particular tour just kind of tells you there it is, so you know when you're ready to enter notes, that's where you're going to go. It's not going to tell you yet how to go about it because I don't want to overwhelm you when you first start. But I do kind of want to show you what's what. So then there's a tour showing you that this is the palettes, and here's the inspector, which controls some details of elements in your score, and then the main menu, and I also mention that there's keyboard shortcuts, and that right-clicking is often a thing because a lot of people don't necessarily realize that that is a way to access commands in MuseScore. And that's basically the startup tour. So there's some basic information about MuseScore that you will find out when you first load it now. So, other than that, like if let's say I click a measure and then I want to start entering some notes and I go to note input mode, if you don't know how to already enter notes, maybe the first thing you try to do is click on a note. Well, now we're going to get a tour telling us a little more about how note input works. So it tells you that you have to click the note input icon or use the shortcut N, and then select a duration. And then to enter a note, you type its letter or click on the staff, and it tells you about control up down to change octave, which is another thing that people don't necessarily always know. I mentioned how to enter rests, including the shortcut, which again, people don't necessarily always know about. We tell you how to add accidentals. We tell you how to add notes to a chord by pressing Shift, which again, people don't necessarily figure out, and or you can just click on the staff. And then I tell you how to enter a tie, which also is very useful because a lot of people don't notice this button and they end up accidentally entering a slur instead because that's the first thing they find. So I want to make sure that people know about ties. And then tell you how to enter triplets. That's another commonly asked question. And then multiple voices. The most commonly asked question probably on the forums has to do with how to enter multiple voices. The problem is that people don't really even know what to call multiple voices. So what I say is to enter notes with different rhythms in the same measure. That's the best way I could think of to describe what the purpose of these buttons is. So I'm not going to show you every single tour. I wanted to give you an idea of the kind of information that is going to be available. And then we're going to keep adding more of these things. So those are the startup tours, and the startup tour as well as just the other tours that show up as you use features. What I want to do is just kind of go through some of the major features so that you can see some of what you have to look forward to here. So probably the biggest new feature is not anything that really you have to do anything about. It's just something that kind of is going to happen automatically, and it's called automatic placement, or there's a few different things actually going on, but let me show you what some of them are. So in order to really get the flavor of this, I want to first switch over to MuseScore 2. And here's MuseScore 2. And in MuseScore 2, let's say I start entering some notes. That's awful quiet, isn't it? Let's make sure. I think I've been at 32 on these things before. All right. Let's say I want to enter a tempo marking. I'll do this from the palette so it's easier to see what's happening. Oh yeah, and I always forget to turn on my thing that displays the shortcuts as I press things. I always forget to do that, and I apologize for that. But let's say I add a tempo marking. And now let's say I want to add a rehearsal letter, and say that this is letter A. Oh no! And then I want to enter a chord symbol and say that this is a C major 7 chord. Look at all that colliding there. Well, if I go to MuseScore 3 and try the same thing, I go here, go to the tempo palette. Oh, and now you get to see, now there's a little more information about how to use the palettes, including information about switching between advanced and basic workspaces, but also telling you that to add a palette item, you can first select an element and then double click. Again, this is one of these things people don't often realize, and people spend a lot of time with drag and drop, which is a much less efficient way of doing things. So I mentioned that you can do it, but I want to emphasize the double click method. All right, so I click the note and then I double click my tempo marking and it appears. All right, now let's go ahead and what was the next thing I added? The next thing I added was, oh yeah, rehearsal letter. Look how they just automatically moved out of each other's way. Let's add a chord symbol. Aha, now that didn't automatically move as well as I wanted it to. So that's why this is still beta version, but you can see what it is at least trying to do here. And in fact, it looked better at first. I'm not sure exactly why that didn't work. But this is what automatic placement does. It automatically moves things around. In fact, this looks like there's room for it right there. So this automatic placement is designed to make these sort of adjustments for you so you're not having to constantly make all these adjustments in your score. Now in this case, I don't like what it did. This is actually just a bug outright. But there might also be, even if it had put this chord symbol in that space, I might say, you know what, I'd rather have the chord symbol below and the text and the tempo above. So maybe I don't like the decision it made. I can turn off automatic placement for that chord symbol. And now the chord symbol is now kind of excluded from the calculation. These two continue to avoid each other, but now I can make the chord symbol be wherever it is. Or maybe these two, I want to, yeah, I can also move these guys individually, and I could, you know, turn off automatic placement for that, but turn it back on for the chord symbol, and then reset its position with Control R, and now the chord symbol and the tempo marking avoid each other, but the rehearsal mark I can now position more manually if I want. So automatic placement is designed to avoid collisions between things, but you can also just adjust things. Let me undo some of those changes I just did. Okay. And that time it put the chord symbol back where it belonged, C major 7. See, it's there, and then it moves it. I'm not sure exactly why. But I don't have to turn off automatic placement. I could just move this thing manually. And now everything is, I only had to move one thing manually that time. So that's part of what automatic placement does. There's more to it than that. Here's another example of something. Let's say that I've entered a note below the staff. And let's say here I enter a note above the staff. And let's say maybe there's chord symbols. Oh no, look at that chord symbol there. And maybe I have to drag it above. And you know, these things are just overlapping. Maybe this note's down here. Right? This looks not good here. If I go here and try some of the same thing, let's move that guy down. What else did I have? I had, this guy was a C. And over here I had a C above the staff. Ready? Let's add my C7 to this now. All right, automatic placement for this chord symbol is not working. I'm going to ignore that. But look what it did, though. It did add space between the staff. If I create staff text instead of a chord symbol, I used Control T. It created extra space for me. So, and you know, I could keep making this note go up, and it's going to keep adding space for me. So it's going to automatically add enough space between staves to avoid collisions. And it only does it as needed. Like here, you can see that this note is colliding with that note. But if I put that same measure over here with copy and paste, you'll see now there's no collision. And so it didn't have to add the space. The collision only existed over here. So the algorithm is fairly smart. It uses what's called a skyline algorithm so that it is like a jigsaw puzzle fitting the staves together where they can, and only adding space where necessary. So automatic placement is by far the biggest, kind of most important new thing in MuseScore 3. And so again, it's not something that you normally mess with. It's just something that's going to improve how your scores look by default. But it's part of the reason why it's been 3 years in the making, because MuseScore 2 was released in 2015, and here we are in 2018. Oh, by the way, so I said this is a beta version. Well, let's come and look at this beta release announcement and scroll down a little bit. We are now announcing a date of December 10th when we are targeting for a release candidate. That doesn't mean the release itself is going to happen then. It thinks that what it means is that we are saying that we want to get all the bugs we can fixed by the 10th, put out another update and say, hey, this one we think is ready to go. What do you think? And then there'll be some more testing. There might be other updates between now and then, but we are talking about releasing MuseScore 3, as you can see, in December, so before the end of the year. So we really are going to encourage people to be trying out this MuseScore 3 beta and helping test it. So I really focused on this automatic placement because this, again, is one of the huge new things in MuseScore 3 that's kind of a little behind the scenes, because it's not a new feature exactly. It's not something that there's a command to access other than turning automatic placement on and off here in the inspector. So it's not a highly visible feature. It's something that hopefully just works. But what it does mean is when you import older scores, they might look a little different. Or as you start working on scores, you might encounter bugs like the one where the automatic placement really wasn't doing what it should. This is a reset button here, by the way. I used Ctrl R. So now when I hit that reset, it actually did the right thing. So it overlapped before, and now it's not. So it's some sort of glitch, and so I'm going to be filing that as an issue as soon as we're done with this. But I'm focusing on this because this is something that changed a lot about MuseScore under the hood, which again is why I said it's taken so long to get to this point, 3 years before we feel it's ready. It's almost ready for release. The placement of chord symbols was recently tweaked, and I'll tell you one of the things that was tweaked about it. I can now go here and say below, and chord symbol is placed below the staff. So I have a feeling that change was only made like 3 days ago. And I have a feeling that's probably what caused this to temporarily break. I'm just speculating because it was actually working. And it's kind of working now. So there's a lot of things like this that obviously are going to be a big deal to test and make sure that things really work as we expect. And so the new features are great, and I want to show you some of those really quick. But it's the automatic layout that's really the big thing that we want to really hit on hard and see if it's doing what people expect. If it doesn't work perfectly, that's okay. You can always disable the automatic placement and then just go back to the way things were in MuseScore 2, where you have to adjust things manually. So it's not the end of the world if something doesn't work perfectly, but we want to make sure it works as well as we intended it to, at least. And this was something that's intended to work. So that's what automatic placement is about. There's one other feature of automatic placement, memorize when exporting. So that's a good question. No, export to music XML. We export position information. This is a very good question. I want to say we export the position information, but we don't necessarily import it because every program has different defaults about where those positions would be, and so it's hard to really trust position information in a music XML file. I'm pretty sure we put it there on export, but we don't honor it on import except in a few cases. Now, is auto placement maintained when saving? Definitely. I mean, if I save this file, when it comes back, it will still be there. So, and also if I decide to turn off auto placement for that chord symbol, that will be remembered when I save the file, and if I adjust the position manually. So all of this stuff is saved as part of your score. But one of the really important reasons I should mention why this is such a big deal is think about how people view scores. I mean, yes, you can spend a lot of time manually adjusting your score to have it look really good when you print it. And this score, let me just shrink it down a bit. I'll set it to whole page. This is a sheet of paper. I think it's A4 paper by default, although since I'm in the United States, it should really be letter. That seems like another thing that I want to report as an issue. So this is all well and good to make all your manual adjustments, make it look really good when you print it. But a lot of people don't access printed music anymore. I mean, I'm a professional musician, and when I show up to play a live performance, I would say probably, I'll just say about half the musicians that I see are reading music off their tablets. Or they're even reading them off their phone, because in a jazz context, often we just need the chord symbols to go off of, and there's apps that iReal Pro is a really popular app that people use. But reading sheet music off of iPads or other tablets is really important. And when you do that, it's not necessarily going to be that you want to view the page exactly as it was printed, because that might actually be too small. You might want to zoom in. And that's going to require like maybe 4 measures. Once I zoom in far enough, 4 measures aren't going to fit on that tablet anymore. If I zoom in this far, you know, maybe this is the size I want to view it on my tablet, and it's only going to really fit 2 measures per line. And so a lot of the manual adjustments you did based on the original layout won't make sense anymore. So one of the whole points about the automatic placement is that it will automatically place it regardless of what the format is, so that if you then read your score on an iPad and there's only 2 measures per line, automatic placement is going to maybe make some different choices. Like this, notice, well, here actually I can show you a great example of that. I put this here and it collides, but if I'm going to get rid of that line break. Just zooming isn't going to do it. So actually, this isn't. That's not doing what I really want it to do. So let me go back. If this measure is directly below that measure, then yes, there is an issue. But if you're viewing it at a different zoom setting, maybe this measure won't be directly below that measure anymore, because now, you know, like word wrap, the measures will flow differently. Those measures won't be directly below each other anymore, so it won't have to add that extra space. So all this stuff is calculated dynamically, and that will be the case in the mobile apps as well. So yeah, so that's some additional information about the auto placement. One other thing I would like to point out is, let me go back to MuseScore 2 for a second. Let's say I wanted to add a slur between here and here. I think it's going to put it above the staff. But look what it did. It didn't do a great job. This is colliding with that, and if I flip it below the staff, it also doesn't do a great job. Well, I'm not going to claim this is going to be perfect, but let's see what happens if I try it here. So it actually avoided the collision. I think this tempo marking might actually be part of the problem here. Let me try moving the tempo marking. Well, I guess it's just doing that. But it avoided the notes. It didn't necessarily do it perfectly. If I flip it below the staff with X, it's avoiding this note. So this is obviously a very odd phrase, but the shape of slurs will make some attempt to avoid notes, so you don't have to do as much manual adjustment of your slurs also. And again, that's something that changes because, you know, the shape of this slur is very different because these 2 measures are adjacent. If there had been a line break between them, then the shape of that slur would have to be very different. So, all right, so I've been talking an awful lot about automatic placement because it's so important, and that's great. I do want to just do a quick run through of some of the additional features that are here, and I went into a little more detail on some of these in the MuseScore 3 Alpha Café, so you can go back and look at some of the old ones. But One of the new features is that I can, I just went back to look at the, I'm just going to undo everything I just did. Undo. All right, is when I'm generating parts, I could enter, let me go back to default size, Control 0, went back to the normal size. If I go to this measure and enter something in voice 2, say that this was part of an orchestra score, this was my first flute part, and this was my second flute part. Entering orchestra scores, traditionally you would enter both flutes on the same staff. And MuseScore never used to really support that very easily. You would have to enter the flutes on separate staves, even though they're very similar. But what we now support is the ability to, when you generate parts, I can say a new part and call it flute. And I can say I just want it to be, oh, I have to add that here. Of course, the instrument's actually piano, but ignore that for now. This is saying it's going to include all 4 voices, but I could say I just want to include, I'll call it piano 1, since that's really what it is, right? It's a piano. So I'm now saying the piano part, the piano 1 part is only going to contain voice 1. And then I can add a piano 2 part that only has voice 2. And when I do this, now I have 2 piano parts. This one has voice 1, that one has voice 2. To be honest, I am not sure what happens if there's only one voice. My guess is it's only going to show up in part 1, and that's true. So you would have to actually add those same notes in voice 2 to get it to show up in the piano 2 part. So anyhow, that's a new feature. Another new feature is, let's see, where am I? The manual overrides the above below. I showed temporary and cutaway staves. So this is really nice. Let's say that you're writing a lead sheet and you want there to be a bass clef just for certain staves. There was always a way to do that before, but it was a little harder than we really wanted it to be. So what I can do is go to Edit Instruments. I can add a staff, and then I can add the notes I want to it, and maybe I want them over here too. And then I can just right-click this staff properties, and say hide when empty, always. I'll talk about what those settings really are in a minute. And what that does, oh gosh, yeah, I forgot there's a bug with that too. I've reported this bug already. I'm going to put this measure over here. It is still just beta, but it's pretty good beta. So now I'm going to go here, and again, staff properties, hide when empty, always, and you see now that I should have done the same thing there. This measure, the bug is if the first measure of a line is empty, it thinks the staff is empty. It's a bad bug. I wish it had been fixed for the beta, but we only found it too late. It's going to be fixed real soon now. Staff properties, hide when empty, always. So the idea is you can have a temporary staff that just shows up where it's needed. And it was always possible to have that by going to your style settings and turning on hide empty staves, but that would hide all empty staves, and maybe that's not what you want. Maybe you have an orchestra score and you want it to show all instruments all the time, but you just want to add an empty staff in one particular place. To do, you know, like maybe the tuba part splits in 2 just for a few measures, and you don't want to have to turn on hide empty staves for the whole score. You just want to do it just for that staff. You just want to add that one temporary staff. So this is a way to do it. Another kind of cool thing about this feature is, let me also add another staff above, well, I'll just use this staff. I can create what's called a cutaway staff. I can set this staff to be a cutaway, and that does this. It makes that staff basically totally disappear. And again, it was sort of possible to do that by going into the measure properties and marking things invisible, but you could actually only do that if there were multiple staves anyhow. So this cutaway staff is useful for creating what are called ossia, when you if you have a passage here and you want to show a simplified version of that passage, or if you have an ornament like a trill here or a mordant and you want to write in an editorial comment above that says, well, this is how that measure should actually be played. This is a way of doing it. It's also just a way of creating modern scores where a lot of composers like to do this. They don't like to show empty measures of rest. They like to just show empty space there where the measures aren't playing in the score. It's also, it just occurred to me now, creating teaching materials, right? If I want to create a scale worksheet, I can enter just the scale here and leave these two measures empty and then turn on the cutaway option and they just disappear. I usually do that sort of thing using frames, but this is another way of doing it. So those are some of the major new features. There's also, jazz people will appreciate this. I am going to create a new score, Control N, and when I do this, I'm going to call it Jazz Score, and I'm going to choose the Jazz lead sheet template. And you see now there is a jazz font for notation. It includes the clefs and the time signatures and the the accidentals, basically everything. It used to be in MuseScore 2 only text. We had a text font for jazz, but now is actual notation. The rests are handwritten. All these things are it's a kind of a handwritten type of font. So that's something a lot of people have really been wanting. I mean, I say a lot of people as a jazz musician, that's my world, so a lot of the people I associate with really like that sort of thing. There's also the ability to have note names. Let's see, that's MuseScore 2. Let's go back to MuseScore 3. Note names in the note heads. So I can go to Staff Properties, Advanced Style Properties, and say I want pitch names. And now I have this, right? So that's something that when you're creating music for especially children or beginners in general is an often requested feature. There were ways of doing that through a plugin, but they were kind of clumsy and manual, and now you set that up and it's all automatic. I mean, that says G, but if I change it to an F, you see it just changed to an F. I mean, it's totally automatic at this point. The automatic system dividers, again, if you're creating like an orchestral score, or say you're creating a score for, I'm going to create another new score for a choral group. So notice there's two systems on this page. It's a common thing to want there to be these like slash marks here to kind of split the systems up. And I can get that to happen. I'm going to go to Style. Oops, I'm in MuseScore 2. Dang it. I'll just use the string quartet. All right, so string quartet, I'm going to go to Format, Style, and I'm going to turn on under System dividers, and I'm going to put them on the left. There we go. And now there's dividers there, and they will appear automatically as I just hit enter there to create a line break. It's going to automatically add those things and remove them as necessary. It totally manages those things automatically, and there were style settings to control the position of them, whether they're on the left or the right, and other aspects of them. And then there's a number of usability things that are just designed to make things easier to use. The tours that I showed you already are one of them. Another one is the ability to search palettes. Like say, boy, I want to add a fermata, but I don't remember where the fermata is. I just type fermata, and boom, there's my fermatas. I just typed FER down here into the search box at the bottom of the palette. So that is a usability feature. All right, so now I'm seeing some chat questions that I, for some reason, missed before. Do the disappeared still measures occupy space, or are they invisible? What happens if you continue to enter notes? Oh, that's a really good question. What does happen if I continue to enter notes? Let's find out. So those measures really are there, and I think if I enter notes, the measure will reappear. I'm scared. Ah, there we go. Yeah, okay. I implemented that feature, but I can't say that I ever tried that. So there you go. So these are real measures. So this is measure 3 because, I mean, this is still measure 3 here. That's still measure 3 here. So this is still measure 3 there. That's still measure 3 there. The next line starts with measure 5 because that's measure 3. That's measure 4. I think, I mean, if I turned on Cutaway for this also, I don't even know. I guess that would probably work, but it's still a real measure with a real measure number. So this is still measure 5, even though it's not, even though it's not showing up. I should put a note there so you can see it. So this is still measure 5. This empty space there, those are still measures. If you don't want measures, then don't use measures. Use frames. That's what frames are for. And I said when I'm creating scale worksheets and things like that, and I want empty space, I normally use frames. Frames are not measures and won't affect the measure numbering. So the Cutaway feature is more for to have one staff have those empty spaces while the other staves continue to have content. That's really the intended purpose of that. Otherwise, you could just use frames. So searchable palettes is a new usability feature. The timeline is a nice feature also. And let me load a actual real score. I don't have any in this folder, of course, because it's brand new. This is MuseScore 3. It's creating separate. It created a separate folder. I'm going to go to my MuseScore 2 folder and load one of my older scores, which is always a little bit dangerous. But I know I did some amount of, let me think. I took a few scores and had created MuseScore 3 versions of them a while ago. I think what I'm going to do is just take a chance and go ahead and take one of my string quartet scores and just try to load it. Scary. Now the first thing I get is a message telling me it was created in an older version and it's recommended to reset the position. In other words, I'd done a lot of manual adjustments and things, but those manual adjustments were based on the defaults in MuseScore 2. So MuseScore 3 is going to have different defaults because the auto placement, probably all the manual adjustments I made don't make sense anymore. So it's recommending I say yes to reset everything to default position. So I'll really get to be just taking advantage of the automatic placement. So I'm going to say yes. So here we go. Here is my score in MuseScore 3. And I did this because what I wanted to do was show the timeline feature. So I'm going to go to View, Timeline. And, oh, a tour shows up to tell me about the timeline. And it tells you what it is. Each box, and it's actually talking about these boxes down here, represents a specific measure of a specific instrument. And it's also showing me the tempo, the time signature, where the rehearsal marks are, where there's double bar lines, if there's a DS or a coda, that sort of thing, and measure numbers. So these are the things that are in this timeline, and I can actually, here because it's an arrangement, it's got multiple staves, I'll make that view a little bigger. So I can just jump right to rehearsal letter C, right to rehearsal letter D, etc. Or I could say, you know what, there was this particular score doesn't have any key changes or time changes. Let me get brave again and load one that does. Let's see, key change, time change. Actually, neither of those do. I think I'd have to get a little more. Actually, I'll just use reunion. Reunion only has one page, but at least it has, I already did a version for MuseScore, for MuseScore 3 at one point. All right, so I just loaded in Reunion here, and again chose the option to reset things, and you can see it's showing me the key signatures. The beginning there, 1 flat, and then apparently it there must be an explicit key change there for some reason, not sure why. 2 sharps, it changes there. I think maybe imported scores like this, it thinks every beginning of every system is a new key change, and I think new scores won't do that. But I can also see here's the change to 3/4, there's the change back to 4/4, another change to 3/4, etc. So it's a way of oh, and here's all the tempo changes where I can navigate by tempo change. So those are all things that you can use, and again, if there had been a DS or that kind of thing, codas, that would show up here. And this is just showing me the measures that actually have content. If there's a measure that like is empty, then it won't show up there. So the timeline is just a useful way of navigating. The search facility, the improved style and inspector. You've already seen me use the inspector here. I'm just going to point out that things like text that used to have settings in text properties, you'd have to right-click this in MuseScore 2, and then you'd have a text properties dialog and then a text style dialog. Text properties would affect the appearance of just that text. Text style would affect all text of that type, of all tempo texts. Well, in MuseScore 3, this is all in the inspector. We don't have dialogues for that anymore. You can just access it directly. So I can change this if I want to be some other font, and then I can change it here. And then if I press the button next to it, that will set it as the style. And now all the tempo markings get that same style. So I don't have to have 2 separate dialogues to kind of manipulate my text anymore. So that's kind of an improvement there. And then the score comparison tool I actually showed off just a week or so ago, because I was a couple weeks ago, because I was showing off the Google Summer of Code thing. So I'm not going to show that, but I do want to briefly talk about this Timewise insert feature, because a lot of people find this a useful thing. I will just say I'm going to click that E, and I'm going to press Ctrl Delete. Look what happened. The E disappeared completely. The gap was closed. The beat disappeared. If I go here, go to Note Input Mode, and press, I think it's Ctrl Shift E, it inserts it. Ctrl Shift F inserts, Ctrl Shift E, and so forth. So you can insert and delete measures within a measure. The measure will expand and contract to accommodate it. So you could do that if you're writing unmetered music. You could do that if you just want to edit things around and you trust yourself to make sure there's 4 beats at the end of the day. You even get this little icon here telling you, hey, look, you've got too many beats there right now. That's what that icon is telling me. You'll also see the little minus icon here telling you, hey, there's too few beats in this measure. That's because it's a pickup. There's nothing wrong. It's just a pickup. So the other thing you can do is go to Note Input Mode and switch to Timewise mode. And now you don't even need the shortcuts. You can just, you don't need Control Shift. You can just start typing notes or clicking notes, and they get inserted automatically. So that is a new feature also. So those are some of the major new features. The last ones I wanted to show you have to do with playback. And it's really not so much a new feature, but just improved interface. If I go to View, Mixer, you see something that now looks like a mixer. And actually, it would be more impressive if I do that with my string quartet score. In MuseScore 2, is this a string? No, it's not a string quartet. In MuseScore 2, you may have remembered, let me bring up that mixer, View, Mixer. In MuseScore 2, you may have remembered the violin and viola. All the stringed instruments would have 3 channels, one for the normal sound, the arco sound, one for the pizzicato sound, and one for the tremolo sound. So you can control all the the relative levels of them individually. That's great, but most of the time you don't really care about that. You don't really want that. You just want one slider to move the whole violin part. So now you can do that. Now the whole violin 1 part is quieter. The whole violin 2 part is quieter. If you want to see the individual channels, well, by all means, you can see that. Just click this to open it up, and it will show the other channels, the pizzicato channel and the tremolo channel. And then you can say, well, you know, the pizzicato I want louder, the normal channel I want quieter, the tremolo channel I want quieter still, whatever. So you can have separate controls if you want, but you didn't have to. You could just change them all together. That's one of the great things about this new mixer. So there's a question about having different time signatures for instruments in the same score. Now the answer is yes, you can. It was always possible in MuseScore 2 as well. It's possible now. What I will say is it was experimental in MuseScore 2, and it's experimental now. But let me show you how to do it. Time signatures, the palettes are actually in a different order than they were. They're designed to be a little more logical. Grace notes used to be on the top for no good reason. Now, clef, key, time signature. Clef, key, time signature, right? It's designed to sort of reflect something about how the music is actually organized. So if I just add a 3/4 here by dragging it, you see it adds it to all staves, and that's normally what we want. But if I add 4/4 by control dragging it, boom, now it's only on that staff. I believe it also works to control click, control double click. Yeah, there you go. So control double click or control drag allows you to add things to just one staff. So this staff, yeah, that obviously didn't work, right? Oh, it's because I'm in that Timewise mode. Ooh, that was scary. I expected to only get 3 beats in that measure, but I'm in Timewise mode. Let me go to regular note input mode. So you can see I'm in 3/4 in this measure. And I'm in 4/4 in that measure. I guess it'd be more impressive if I actually changed notes. Whoops, what did I do? I hit a shortcut I didn't mean to hit. Control Alt down. Control Alt down. So here we go. So that's the answer. Yes, you can do it. It works. There's a lot of limitations, like copy and paste will either fail. Yeah, you'll just get an error message. And the error message is not accurate. There's a lot of limitations here, a lot of issues with these. They're called local time signatures. But the feature is there. Copy and paste won't work. There's a number of other things that won't work. The measures have to be empty when you add these things, so you have to kind of set it up before you enter your notes. You can't enter the notes, then change the time signatures around. But anyhow, the feature is there. So anyhow, I was talking about the various playback features, and I showed you that mixer. Let me just briefly bring that mixer back up. It's F10 is the shortcut. So in addition to the fact that I could expand those channels, you can see you can also now affect the MIDI port and the MIDI channel. So if you're using MIDI output, you can control that. And then also there is a feature that was in MuseScore 2 but not really documented and was extremely limited, and it is now greatly improved. And I'm going to go to View, Piano Roll. Help me. Oh, it's not under View. I have to right click. It should be under View, I think. Anyhow, Piano Roll Editor, right click the measure. So now I have the piano roll showing me all these notes. And if I go to play the score, right? I hear the score. But if I want to like say, you know what, this note, it'd be a little better if it were starting if it was starting a little bit later. So what I can do, let me expand this window a little bit. I can change its on time. Whoops, what did I do? I need to actually use these arrows. And I can just make that note be later. I'll just change it to 100 so you can see. And you see that it's made that note be a little bit later in time. So those of you who really like tweaking the playback to make it a little more realistic, this is now a much easier process. There's also graphical views here where I can view the on times of things and drag them. I haven't really played with this feature to know exactly how it works, so I don't remember, to be honest, how to make all this stuff do what it's supposed to do. So I will be learning this so I can explain it more, but feel free to be playing with this feature. This is supposed to be showing me ways of representing these notes, and let me edit the notes down here. So the piano roll editor is greatly improved in MuseScore 3. So those of you who really like dealing with this kind of interface, which is common in sequencer programs and some audio programs also. People who like dealing with music at that level, where you're tweaking the playback, you'll really enjoy that. So that is my tour of MuseScore 3. The last thing that I want to do is just talk about what we would love for you to do. So we would love for you to download the thing. So again, in the chat, I had already given the link to where you can get the announcement, and there in the announcement is the links to actually download it for the various operating systems. And we want you to report bugs. If you find a problem, there's a nice big button right here to report a bug. Also under the help menu, you'll see report a bug. You'll also see ask for help. So if you have questions, use the ask for help button. Here it'll take you to the support forum where you can ask questions, and then you can attach the score you're having problems with. Also, you can just use the leave feedback button if you just have more general feedback for the MuseScore team. But mostly we think that actually reporting bugs when you find something that doesn't work exactly the way it should, or if you're not sure if it works the way it should, or if you're just not sure how to do something, use the ask for help here and go to the forum to ask for help. So we want you to be doing this. We want you to take advantage of the updates as they become available, and it will every day check for updates by default, but you can also go to the help menu and say check for update, and I have the newest version. And then if there's a newer version, it'll show you the release notes for it and give the option to install it. It's all going to be as automatic kind of as it can be. And we want you to kind of keep updating it and keep trying out these new features. So going to this page here where I list what some of these new features are is useful. We want to also make more documentation available for this. So we are very quickly now working on updating the handbook and creating additional tutorials and things to talk about the new features in MuseScore 3. We want people to start really trying these things out and hitting on them and helping us fix bugs so that when we release MuseScore 3 for real in, probably less than a month, it will be the best it can possibly be. So I hope you've enjoyed this tour of the MuseScore 3 beta release, and please download it, give it a shot, and start using it. It's not totally, it's still a beta release, but it is totally usable. We promise that any scores you create in this beta release will work in the final release. So if you're feeling brave, you can go ahead and use it and feel safe that your scores will still be accessible once the final release comes out. So with all that said, I will sign off. I think the next couple weeks, my plan is to go back to talking about music. I like to talk sometimes about the technological stuff and how to use MuseScore. Sometimes it's complicated, how to do really advanced things. Sometimes it's some more basic things. The next couple weeks, I want to talk about music. I want to talk about arranging some music doing some simple reharmonizations and arranging for piano of since it's the Christmas season, I want to take a Christmas Carol and talk about creating an arrangement of an interesting arrangement of a Christmas Carol. And I kind of am thinking I'm probably going to do this in 2 parts. So anyhow, that's what you have to look forward to, unless I change my mind. So I will see you hopefully next week, and have a great time playing around with MuseScore 3.